Thank you for tuning in to Mac Review Television, and welcome to a brand new edition of the Taiwan Outlook. I'm your host, Wu Ruiguo. People say that music is a universal language. In a globalized world, it brings people together from different cultures, nationalities, and ethnicities. And on today's program, we're delighted and honored to have a very special guest, Mr. Matthew Lien, who's a well-known music composer, producer, and performer here in Taiwan. Matthew, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Raymond. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes.
谢谢大家，大家好，我是马修。
Yes.
My standard introduction.
Yeah, good. And Matthew, we know that, like I said at the beginning, you wear multiple hats. You produce,
right.
You perform, and also at the same time you compose.
Right.
And can you then share with us, how did you first get started in the pursuit of music? When did you first get interested in music itself?
I don't remember.
Okay, maybe it was very
I'm sure
little.
That it must be as with any child.
Yes.
As soon as you first hear music that you like, that you enjoy the feeling of
course.
Something catches your imagination,
exactly.
It's the beginning. And I was lucky, I think, to grow up with a family that was very passionate about music.
Okay.
My mother is from Germany.
Okay.
And so she's very passionate not only about her traditional folk music from Bavaria, but also American folk music. And at that time, during the 60s and 70s, when I was growing up as a young child, the rock and roll music and the European and American folk music was also going through a kind of revival at that time.
Exactly.
So we had folk musicians coming to the house. She was a member of the Folk Song Society.
Terrific.
And so every month we'd have, like maybe 20 or 30 musicians all sitting in a circle in the living room. They'd move the furniture out, and people would sit around with fiddles and banjos and guitars, mandolins, and play music late into the night. And then she would take me to the opera or to the orchestra, the San Diego Symphony Orchestra.
Okay, good.
So I was exposed to all this different kinds of music.
While you were growing up?
While I was growing up. And she had a kind of passion. She's very passionate and very loving about the music that she feels strongly about. And as a child, you take your cues from your parents. My father, being Norwegian, he's more understated with his emotions.
Okay.
But he also would send his signals as to what music he really loved.
Yeah, prefers. Yes.
And I could pick up on that as a child.
Okay.
And then later, I was exposed to so many musical instruments. So when I was 10, my mother bought an old antique upright piano.
Oh, okay.
And I taught myself how to play that. I didn't want
really
piano lessons
on your own. You didn't go to
on my own.
Little lessons.
She tried. She hired a piano teacher, which lasted about a month or less.
Yeah.
And I found that the music they were relying on to teach you the piano was so rudimentary and basic and uninspiring.
Yes, within the box.
It was very much in the box. And compared to the music I was already surrounded by, it didn't make any sense. Yeah, I just wanted to find my own way.
Yes.
And what's the reason we hire a piano teacher for our children is to make sure they play and they learn.
Develop the interest.
But if they do it on their own, then there's no need.
Yeah.
And that was her thought. So when I asked her to quit the lessons, let me just go my own way.
Yes.
Both my mother and father were very supportive of that.
Okay. So you had multiple sources of influence while you were growing up, getting involved and interested in music. And when did you first have your first album? I remember reading about your bio. That was back in Canada. It was in the early 90s.
Actually, it was in the 80s.
80s, okay.
Yeah,
earlier.
What people think is my first album is called Bleeding Wolves.
Okay.
And this is the album that was first released internationally, so people assume that's my first album.
Okay.
But because I never went to university, I was doing my own kind of education.
Exactly.
And that also involved finding my own way in the recording studio.
Okay.
When I learned that there is a place called a recording studio.
Yes.
In the studio, you can layer by layer create music productions, anything you can imagine.
That's right.
And because I was already very aware of multiple sources of inspiration from different cultures, I knew that if I could pull a bagpipe from there and I could pull a Scottish war drum from over here, and I could blend these different instruments together, European, American, later would be Asian.
Of course.
And create any dream that I could imagine. So what happened was I started saving money myself, working some day job, and then going to the studio in my free time.
Okay.
And I would record 3 songs at a time. Gradually, over the course of about a year, I guess, working as a tile setter at that time in the construction industry, I finally had enough songs recorded that I could call it an album. And so I put them all together and made my first cassette tape at that time. That was
Demo
before
tape?
CDs.
Yes. Okay.
We didn't have CDs at that time.
No,
CDs were just coming out.
That's right.
And then released it on CD, and it was surprisingly well received in Canada, in my local area in the Yukon Territory.
Okay, good.
The album was called Music to See By.
Okay.
And that was the result of people saying that my music seemed to inspire images in the mind when you listen to it. And for myself as well, when I create music, I feel like I'm creating the soundtrack to a movie that has not yet been filmed like this.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And Matthew, you grew up in Canada. And what brought you to Asia, to Taiwan in particular? When did you come to Taiwan?
Well, the Taiwanese brought me to Taiwan.
Really? So you met some Taiwanese in Canada, or?
Not quite like that.
Okay.
I mentioned that the album Bleeding Wolves was my second
that
effort.
was internationally released.
I released that internationally because I felt it was worthy.
Okay.
And the first album, Music to See By, was basically my thesis. You know, it was the equivalent of my final exam in university, if I had gone to university. In other words, it wasn't really quite professional enough, I felt.
You're too modest.
Thank you. But it did prepare me for the next album, which was Bleeding Wolves.
Exactly.
And my agent at that time, from Canada, took the album to Midem, which is it's an international showcase in Cannes, in France, in the south of France, of independent music distributors from around the world and music labels that represent people like me. They all meet there and they exchange each other's cards and listen to music. And,
of course.
And there was a company called Wind Records, Wind of Music now.
That's from Taiwan.
From Taiwan. And they got a copy of the album Bleeding Wolves and loved it. So we agreed to release it here and in China at the same time. And the album sort of was phenomenally successful. It was really stunning for both the record company and for me. I still felt I was a kid almost, you know, and my album that was purely my own passion, my own independent effort. I wasn't trying to be famous. I wasn't trying to make music of a certain style. I just wanted to follow my heart, follow my ambition, and my inspiration. And that seemed to be touching the hearts of people in Taiwan, which I had no familiarity with before.
You didn't see that coming, though.
Not at all.
Okay. But what kind of feedback did you get when you released the album here, you know, in Taiwan as well as in China? What people, of course, this was something, you know, brand new. A lot of people are never exposed to it, you know, prior to your release. And did they give you any feedback or response? And what was some of it?
Most of the initial feedback was coming by way of the record companies or secondhand, because the record company, Wind Music, they have a card in every CD. And if you like the album, you can write back. Usually people send back the card, just fill out the questionnaire. But people were sending back these with a lot of comments, testimonials about how the music was changing their lives. And there's a prison in Penghu where the prisoners had written a book based on their emotional response to the music. And that book became a bestseller in Taiwan. And all these sort of amazing things were happening with the album. This inspired me to ask Wind Music if there was any opportunity to cooperate. Because I love cultural music. So
yes, of course.
Is there some way we could cooperate? I can come there to Asia somewhere, and we could cooperate to make a cross-cultural project together. And that led to the album Confluence.
And that's your third
album. Was my third album.
And
they suggested the city of Nanjing in mainland China for this album. And the reason was, I think, both because recording costs were low there, but there's a wealth of traditional musicians that they felt I could easily connect with. And they had some contacts there. So I still had never been to Taiwan. So I went to Nanjing, and this was my first time to Asia. And it was, you know, just amazing at that time, in 1996.
Yeah, that was at the beginning of the so-called, you know, opening up to the West by China.
Yeah, that's right.
Certainly, Nanjing wasn't one of the first cities.
No, it wasn't. And you
probably
could feel that.
Didn't see many foreigners like yourself.
Not at all, or English or anything. So I loved it because I was sort of swimming, almost drowning in a complete cultural foreign territory. And,
yes.
And I was just drinking it up. I mean, to me, it was very interesting.
Yes.
And the good thing about Nanjing, compared to some other places in China, is that it has some very interesting cultural locations. And this, to me, is critical. Mm-hmm. So I was lucky that was my first exposure to China, because actually, since I tour there a lot now, and I'm somewhat saddened by the loss of culture, I think, that occurred there in the past decades.
Very much internationalized, especially along the coast.
Right, and we risk, losing our culture everywhere, even in Taiwan. So I worry about this today, but that's another
we can talk
topic.
About that later on.
Yeah.
So so you went to Nanjing first,
right?
And when did you, after Nanjing, then come to Taiwan?
The album was released in 1997, and in 1998 I came here for the promotion and the first concert to promote.
Okay.
And that's when I really saw firsthand the response to the music of Bleeding Wolves.
Okay.
The concert was in Da'an, Sanling Gongyuan, Da'an Park here in Taipei.
Yeah.
And the audience, there were well over 10,000 people there. The place is not set up for so many people.
No.
But the ocean of people were sprawling way beyond the hills. And I was thrilled because I felt that we all shared something in common. We all shared a common passion for nature, for culture, for music. And somehow, through music, we were communicating very clearly.
You were making that connection,
Maybe even better than you could through dialogue.
Yes, exactly.
So this was the first time I came here, and that led to many future efforts in Taiwan.
Of course. And over the course of the years that you've spent in Taiwan, have you noticed there were changes, especially from your, listeners to your music as Taiwan also develops in the process?
Definitely. Well, one change that affects us more than anything, I think, is the change of the music industry itself and the way that we bring music to the people now.
All right.
CD stores are almost gone,
yes.
and CD sales are
going down.
And the whole concept of recording, 45 to 50 minutes of music, calling it an album with a concept and releasing that. That whole concept is slowly slipping away. And with the internet now, we're looking more at you can record one song if you want and try to make it a hit.
That's right.
So it's quite different. But the more meaningful changes that I think I've seen is that there were people that were elementary, junior high school students 10, 12 years ago when they first listened to Bleeding Wolves. And many of them will come to me at different events and tell me how the music has changed their life and caused them, for instance, to study ecology or environmental protection.
Or be more environmentally conscious.
And even change the course of what they wish to do with their lives, because they're now in university or even postgraduate. So it's really inspiring and touching to see how it has so truly affected people 10 years on.
I want to thank Matthew for that very thorough introduction about your background, about how you broke into the music area. And after we're going to take a short break on Taiwan Outlook, we'll come back and we'll continue this conversation with Mr. Matthew Lien. We're going to talk about his passion for eco music here in Taiwan. I'll see you in about 2 minutes.